Have you ever waited alone in an airport late at night? Imagine this. You're the last passenger left, your flight's delayed, and the entire terminal is eerily silent. Then you notice shadows moving behind the closed gates. But there's no staff, no other passengers, just you and them. And when you try to leave, the doors are locked from the inside. This is what happened to Sarah, and no one has seen her since. It's a quiet, foggy night at a remote airport, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. A lone passenger, Sarah, sits in the eerie silence of Terminal 3, waiting for her delayed flight. The terminal is practically abandoned, save for a few scattered employees who seem disinterested in their work. It's past midnight, and most of the shops are closed. The air feels heavy, and the fluorescent lights flicker intermittently, casting strange shadows across the vast, empty room. Sarah checks the time. Her flight was supposed to have boarded an hour ago. She approaches the window to see if any updates are posted on the departure board, but the screen shows nothing. She glances around nervously. The entire terminal feels off. The silence feels too thick. The floor beneath her feet creaks as she walks, and she can't shake the feeling that something is watching her. As Sarah turns to sit back down, she hears a faint sound. At first, it's barely audible, like footsteps echoing from a distant hallway. She freezes, her breath catching in her throat. The footsteps grow louder, and she instinctively looks toward the farthest gate. The lights above flicker once more, and she sees figures moving behind the large glass panels of the closed gate. At first, it seems like staff preparing for a shift change, but there's something unsettling about their movements. Too fluid, almost unnatural. Curiosity and dread war with each other as she approaches the gate. As she gets closer, she notices the figures don't look right. There are no reflections on the glass, and they move in ways that human beings shouldn't be able to. Their features are blurry, like distorted shadows. Sarah's heart races and she steps back. The figures continue to move toward the door, their footsteps echoing with unnatural precision. But when Sarah checks the other gates, she sees no staff members, no passengers, no one at all. The hairs on the back of her neck stand up as she turns to leave, but the door to the terminal is locked. She tries to shake the door handle, but it doesn't budge. Panic creeps in as she races to the other exit. Again, locked. She presses her hands against the cold glass of the nearest window, staring into the dark night outside. That's when she notices it. Through the glass, she can see something standing at the edge of the terminal, just beyond the reach of the dim lights. It's a figure watching her. Terrified, she turns back toward the gate, but the figures are gone. The terminal is empty once again. The lights flicker one last time before everything goes dark. A cold chill fills the air, and she feels the presence of something far darker, something that wasn't there before. The silence is deafening. Then, a voice whispers from the darkness, "You shouldn't be here." Frozen in place, Sarah's eyes dart around the terminal. She can't see anyone, but the voice continues to echo in her mind, repeating, "You shouldn't be here." She hears the sound of footsteps again, closer this time, and she turns toward the source, desperate to escape. But no matter how fast she runs, she's never able to reach the exit. The terminal stretches on an endless maze. The figures are always just ahead, never allowing her to leave. In her panic, she drops her phone. The screen cracked. As it glows faintly, a message appears on the screen. "Your flight was canceled long ago." The next morning, airport staff find the terminal empty, except for Sarah's phone lying on the floor. The last message on her cracked screen reads, "Final boarding call, Gate 13." But there's no Gate 13 in the terminal. As the staff member looks around, the terminal lights flicker once, then twice. In the reflection of the glass, just for a second, he sees Sarah standing behind him, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear, before the reflection vanishes. The camera lingers on the empty terminal. Then, a faint voice echoes through the intercom. Final call for Sarah. Please proceed to gate 13. Cut to black. You know that feeling when something's just off during a flight? Imagine boarding a late-night plane, turbulence shaking the wings, the flight attendants acting strange. Too quiet, too cold. But when you check the cockpit, the pilot isn't what you expected. He's not alive. And the worst part? The plane isn't heading where you think it is. This is Ethan's last flight, and it never landed. It's a dark and stormy night when Ethan, a frequent flyer, boards a late-night flight bound for home. The airport is eerily quiet. Most flights have been delayed due to the heavy rain and thunder. His flight, however, is still on time, and the gate staff assure him it will take off as scheduled. Once aboard, Ethan settles into his seat in the near-empty cabin. The soft hum of the plane's engines is interrupted only by the occasional murmur of a flight attendant. The interior is dimly lit, and the rhythmic flickering of the overhead lights seems oddly soothing. As the plane taxis down the runway, the storm outside intensifies, and the wind howls in a way that makes the plane shake. After takeoff, the turbulence worsens. The aircraft drops suddenly, then rises again, each bump making Ethan's stomach lurch. He notices the flight attendants moving briskly down the aisles, but there's something strange about them. No smiles, no eye contact, just stiff, robotic movements. Ethan tries to shake off the growing sense of unease. Maybe it's just the storm affecting his nerves. As the flight continues, things start to feel off. The plane grows eerily quiet. The usual safety announcements seem hollow and distant, and the air feels colder. Ethan looks out the window to see nothing but thick, black clouds. It's hard to tell where the sky ends and the night begins. Feeling restless, Ethan heads toward the cockpit to inquire about the status of the flight. When he approaches, he notices the door to the cockpit is slightly ajar. He hesitates for a moment before gently pushing it open. Inside, there's a strange sight. The cockpit is unusually dim. The captain, an older man with graying hair, sits in the pilot's seat, his face hidden in shadow. He turns to Ethan and gives a faint nod, but something about his gaze feels cold, distant. Ethan tries to make small talk, asking if the storm is causing the turbulence. The captain doesn't respond directly, but his eyes seem to peer through Ethan, not at him. Everything is under control. The captain finally mutters in a voice that sounds almost hollow. We'll be landing soon. Ethan feels a chill run down his spine, but he doesn't argue. As he turns to leave, he feels the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The flight attendants, who had been eerily still in the cabin, are now standing in the aisles, their faces expressionless. The silence in the plane is deafening. Returning to his seat, Ethan tries to shake off the strange encounter, but then the lights flicker and go out completely. The entire plane is swallowed by darkness. For a few seconds, Ethan is paralyzed by fear. What's happening? His heart pounds as the plane continues to shake violently. Just as he's about to reach for his phone, the lights flicker back on, but the plane is no longer flying as it should. It's plummeting toward the ground. Ethan can see the flight attendants now. Their eyes are empty, hollow, their faces pale as ghosts. Suddenly, the captain's voice crackles over the intercom, but it's not the voice he heard earlier. It's an echo, distant and eerie. We never landed, Ethan. You were never meant to get home. The ground below seems to rise at a terrifying speed. The storm outside is worse than ever, and Ethan's seatbelt tightens around him as the plane dives. As the plane crashes into the darkness, everything goes black. Ethan jolts awake in an empty seat. The plane is eerily still, floating in thick, endless clouds. The seatbelt sign blinks red instead of the usual yellow. Confused, he stumbles toward the cockpit, but it's sealed shut. As he pounds on the door, a distorted voice crackles through the intercom. We are now approaching our final destination. Prepare for arrival. The windows darken, and Ethan realizes there's no ground below, just an endless void. Suddenly, a cold hand grabs his shoulder. He spins around, but the screen cuts to black before the audience sees what's there. Static lingers, then silence. What if you met someone in an airport lounge who wasn't supposed to be there? Picture this: you're alone, waiting for your delayed flight, when a man in an old suit sits across from you. His face is pale, his voice cold, and he whispers, "I was supposed to board this flight with you, but I never made it." The question is, did you? It's a quiet evening at a nearly empty airport. The delays have caused most flights to be rescheduled, and the lounge is nearly deserted except for Jake, a frequent business traveler. His connecting flight has been delayed for hours, and he's beginning to feel the weight of exhaustion settle in. He settles into a seat near the windows, staring blankly out into the dark, rain-soaked runway. The air is thick with the hum of distant announcements and the occasional footsteps of a stray airport worker. The fluorescent lights above flicker faintly, casting an eerie glow over the empty space. Jake takes a deep breath, trying to shake off his unease. His phone battery is almost dead, and there's no one to talk to in the lounge. The only other person there is a well-dressed man sitting in a chair across the room, staring at the floor, unmoving. His suit is old-fashioned, the kind Jake associates with a different era. It's odd how out of place the man seems in such a modern setting. Jake glances at him again, a strange sensation crawling up his spine. The man's face is pale, and his posture is unnaturally stiff. He doesn't seem to be doing anything, just sitting there, unmoving. Jake tries to ignore the unsettling feeling but can't shake the odd vibe the man gives off. As he watches him, the man slowly raises his head, their eyes meeting across the room. For a brief moment, Jake feels like the world stops. The man's gaze is piercing, as if he can see right through him. His eyes are cold, dark, and unnerving. It's not just the intensity that's disturbing. There's something unnatural about the way the man looks at him, as if he knows something Jake doesn't. Suddenly, the stranger stands up. His movements are slow, deliberate, as if he's been waiting for this moment. He approaches Jake without saying a word. As he gets closer, Jake notices the strange details. His suit is frayed at the edges, and his shoes are covered in dirt, as though he's been walking for days. His pale face looks unnaturally gaunt, like someone who hasn't seen the sun in years. "Are you lost?" the man asks in a quiet, raspy voice, his breath cold as he leans in. His words seem to hang in the air for too long, as if time itself is slowing down. Jake feels a chill run through him, but he forces himself to respond. I'm just waiting for my flight. It's delayed." The man smiles faintly, but it's a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Ah yes, delays. They always keep you waiting." He pauses, looking around the lounge, his gaze lingering on the empty chairs. "But you're not waiting for a flight, are you?" Jake frowns, confused. "What do you mean?" The man steps closer, his presence overwhelming. "You were supposed to board this flight with me," he says, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I never made it. Not really." Suddenly, the air in the lounge grows cold, and the lights flicker violently. Jake steps back, his heart racing. He feels the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The man is no longer standing in front of him, but now he's standing just behind him. Jake spins around, but there's no one there. Panicked, Jake rushes to the door, desperate to get out of the lounge. But as he tries to open it, it's locked. He turns around to find the lounge empty, except for the man who is standing by the window, looking out into the dark night. His reflection in the glass doesn't match his movements. The man's image is frozen in place, staring back at him. Jake's heart pounds in his chest as the door finally opens with a loud click. He stumbles into the hallway, his legs shaking. The lights flicker again, and for a split second, Jake thinks he sees the man standing in the reflection of a nearby mirror. His face distorted, his eyes black as night. Shaking, Jake hurries down the hallway, not looking back. But when he reaches the terminal, he stops dead in his tracks. The gate has changed. The flight is no longer listed. The terminal is completely silent. He looks around, but no one seems to notice him. He tries to check his phone, but the screen is blank. The time is frozen, stuck in an endless loop. The message on the screen reads, "You never left. This flight is not for you." Jake finally escapes the lounge and rushes to the main terminal, gasping for air. Everything looks normal again. Passengers, announcements, lights, but something feels off. He checks the departure board. His flight is still listed as delayed, just like before. Confused, he turns to ask an airport worker, but they walk right past him as if he isn't there. Panicking, he checks his reflection in a nearby window. There's no reflection. Then, the airport intercom echoes through the terminal. "Passenger Jake Reynolds, please return to the lounge. Your flight is ready to board." Jake freezes. The camera zooms out slowly as the crowd moves around him. Oblivious. Cut to black. Would you like any further adjustments or additions to this version for your video? Airports are places of arrivals and departures, but sometimes, not everyone makes it to their destination. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, comment your scariest travel experience, and subscribe for more horror stories. Until next time, safe travels, if you're lucky.